Hello class, and welcome to another one of our video classrooms. Still in my home office. This is chapter 5. So we have moved on, and this is process costing. So if you remember way back before spring break, we talked about job order costing versus process costing. So companies that keep track of jobs and the costs, we've already discussed. This costing mechanism, process costing, chapter 5, is about companies that are making lots and lots of the same item, so they don't track them by job. So Coca-Cola making Coke, Pepsi, oil companies, iPhones. So we're making the same item over and over again. So the challenge here is that we have to track costs from department to department. And now, by the way, I am talking about all the costs, materials, labor, and overhead. We're tracking all of them. So again, this is process costing, and it is in the book, chapter 5. So before we go through the problem, which I will demonstrate, which by the way is E532A, I want to just go through some basic steps that we are going to do. So the first thing is we need to figure out how much at the end of any given month is in process, work in process, because we have a whole bunch of money that's in that department and we need to allocate it to the work in process. So, for example, if I told you that we had 20 cars in process at the end of the month and they were 50% complete, we could say, well, that's equal to 10 cars. In other words, 20 at 50% complete. So, that's the first step. How much is in work in process? Second step, what percent complete are those items in work in process? And we need to add that to what's already been finished during the month to calculate equivalent units. And that really is the key. Because once we have that number, we know how much money has been transferred into the account. Step 3. So we were simply going to divide the total cost by the equivalent units to come up with the cost per unit. And the last step is we're going to multiply how many were finished times that cost per unit and transfer it to the next department. And by the way, these steps are all listed in your book, but I will show you how we're going to work through them using this problem. Now, why did I pick this problem? Because this problem actually takes us through the whole process. So some of the other problems we were just doing a part. Okay, so this problem, we have Eastern Company, and they tell us a number of things. So we're going to pick out what's important to begin with. They tell us that they began the month with no work in process. And by the way, we'll start. So they began the month with no work in process. Okay, fine. During the month, they started work on 28,000 units. And by the way, I'm going to set up 2 columns. I'm going to set up one for materials, and the other one's going to be conversion costs. And conversion costs are labor and overhead. So we've got all 3 pieces picked up: materials, labor, and overhead. Okay, so they began with nothing. During the month, they started 28,000 units, and then during the month they tell us that they completed 22,000 units finished. And by the way, we are going to be concerned with the finished ones towards the end. But for now, what am I figuring out? Back to that item before. How much was in process at the end of the month? Well, 6,000 units. Okay, so now the question is, we're sort of up to item 2 on my chart. What percent complete were these? So we are told in the problem that as for materials, they are 35% complete. And as for conversion costs, they are 70% complete. So we're going to multiply 6,000 times 35%. And that's going to give us what number? 6,000 times 35%. I need my calculator. Okay, so 6,000 times 35%, 2,100, and 6,000 times 70%, 4,200. So the 6,000 units being 35% complete, we're going to call that as if there were 2,100 that were complete. So we're going to come up with now the equivalent units. Well, we know we had 22,000 that were finished. So we've got 22,000. We're going to add to this number and to this number. So we have 24,100 units complete as to materials, and we have 26,200 complete as to conversion costs, labor and overhead. And let me just check my math, since we all know I make mistakes from time to time. 24,1, 26,2. Wonderful. Okay. So again, this is probably the most important piece. So just to recap, we're figuring out how much is in process, and we're multiplying those numbers by what percent complete they are to say, well, 6,000 that are 35% complete is like having 2,100 that are 100% complete. So there we have 24,100, 26,200. And here are our equivalent units. Now for the money. So they tell us that they put how much in for materials during the month. They added costs of $12,000 for materials, $12,532. And for conversion costs, $28,820. And so to come up with a cost per unit, we are going to simply divide that by these numbers. So 12,532 divided by 24,100 means that it's 52 cents a unit. And for conversion costs, we have $1.10 per unit. Okay, so we're actually up to the second to last step. So we know how many units we have equivalent, and we figured out a cost per unit. Why? Because we need to transfer the costs. Remember I told you we were going to be interested in the 22,000? We need to transfer the cost of those 22,000 units out of the department they're in into the next department. So I'm going to erase a bunch of this to give us a little bit more room. So remember the 22,000 And I'm actually going to erase everything except for that. The money, the per item. Okay, so we have 52 cents, and by the way, we can add these together now. So we have 52 cents for materials, and we have $1.10 for labor and overhead. And so we can add them together and say the cost per unit is $1.62. How many units did they finish during the month? 22,000. So we're going to multiply $1.62 times 22,000 units, and that will give us, let's see, $11,444, I believe. Nope, $35,640. All right, last thing. So this is the amount of money that we need to move from one department to the next. And now I'm going to mention those two words that most of you really hate to hear: debit and credit. I know, we don't want to talk about them much in this class, but I have to today. So we are going to move $35,000 from the department they are in, which, did they tell us which department they were in? We're going to move the $35,000 from work in process in the testing department to the testing department from the assembly department. So here's the debit. And by the way, as you can see, the debit here is to one work in process department and the credits to another. So we're taking the $35,000 out of the assembly department because they're finished being assembled. And now this amount of money, which represents 22,000 units, are ready to be tested. So we're now tracking for the 22,000 units, $35,000 is going out of the assembly department and into the testing department. Testing, assembly. And that, folks, is the flow of process costing. So again, just to recap, we're talking about companies that need to track money, not jobs. So when they're just tracking units of the same item and coming up with the equivalent units, which we did before, is probably the most single important part of this calculation. So that's all we're going to cover from chapter 5. I wish you all to stay well and healthy, and I'm wearing Ravens purple, so thinking of brighter days, and you all have a great one as well. Thanks.